The House will be in order. The Chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., January 2nd, 2020. I hereby appoint the Honorable Karen Bass to act as Speaker Pro Tempore on this day. Signed, Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
You're working now on a really interesting project, and that is working on America's relationship with Africa.
Yes.
And specifically Africa's image.
Yes.
Why is that important, and what are you trying to do?
It's so important to me to change the way our country views the continent of Africa. And I actually think that we kind of look at Africa like we do inner city America. You know, all the problems, needing help all the time. And I joke and say that people in the United States think Africa is a country the size of Texas. I mean, so it's important to me to educate people that Africa is a continent with 50+ countries. You can fit the United States in there 3 times. And we need to view Africa as a partner, an opportunity. The rest of the world does. We need to do business with the continent of Africa and not just look at Africa from the point of view of foreign aid. As a matter of fact, I like the slogan that's used in Africa, trade, not aid. So we're going to be taking a delegation over to the opening of the African Union in February. And then in August, Speaker Pelosi led a delegation with the Congressional Black Caucus to go to Ghana because, last year was the 400th anniversary from our arrival on the continent. We simply cannot continue to preach democracy, freedom of speech, and the freedom of religion when we ban people from our country. And regardless of how my colleagues on the other side of the aisle think it is perceived that we are banning people because they have the Muslim faith. Today, the House will pass the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act and designate lynching as a hate crime under federal law. I am proud of House leadership and Representative Rush, Senator Harris, Booker, our chairman, for their leadership. But I do have to say that we must admit it is a bit of a travesty that it has taken 120 years for the U.S. government to address this crime. In fact, the first bill to outlaw lynching was introduced in 1900. Mr. Harris, I had the incredible opportunity of visiting the prison where you were incarcerated.
Yes.
And meeting with some of the individuals. And I just wanted to know what takes place inside the prison to prepare people. Many of the people that we saw were there for life.
Well, I think that a lot of incarcerated men-driven programming is the thing that helps with the reentry process while you're inside.
So I just want to congratulate a new generation of youth, a new generation of activists who I believe will take the lead in stopping the industry from doing what it has done before.
This must be our attitude now. We who love justice, truth, and righteousness, we must see the possibility of this nation, Alma, because if anybody fights you this damn hard, you must be mighty powerful.
The undercount has been something that we've had to deal with historically, but seeing how it's going to be done this year gives us greater concern. So the Congressional Black Caucus was so concerned that we decided to form a specific task force to look at our districts and to make sure that we count everybody. I rise today to strongly support HRes 410. The purpose of this resolution is to encourage reunions of divided Korean American families. Last year, I had the opportunity to meet Ki-young-ju Lee, a 90-year-old Korean American man from Virginia. Mr. Lee has not seen his 3 older brothers and sisters since he fled North Korea more than 70 years ago, but he prays for them daily. He has no idea if they are even still alive. Tears streamed down his face during that meeting as he held my hands and urged me to do what I can to help Korean families to be reunited. This resolution originated at a town hall meeting where a group of constituents called this issue to my attention. As I learned more about these aging Korean Americans who just want to be able to see their siblings and parents, I knew that I, in fact, had to do all that we could do to raise this issue.
I know you were Congresswoman, a physician's assistant, and a clinical instructor at USC's School of Medicine. I know doctors in the Bay Area. What do you make of this doctor's frustration?
Well, it hits me hard, especially having worked in a county hospital where our supplies were often very low. I feel her pain as having been a healthcare worker in the middle of the AIDS crisis when we really didn't understand where the virus was coming from or how it was being transmitted. So I know the fear that these healthcare workers must have, and I absolutely agree with her. It is a crime. It's unconscionable that we were not prepared when we knew that this was on the horizon. And unfortunately, the administration didn't take it seriously.
As we see the consequences, the collateral consequences of how the virus is impacting communities, we want to make sure that vulnerable populations don't fall through the cracks.
But there's a lot of people in those prisons, and those people that are sick, you have pregnant women, you have different people, they need to be thought about. And especially people that haven't committed violent offenses or short timers or in there for things that are petty. You know,
or what if you're just in jail because you didn't have enough money to make bail?
Exactly.
A few days after the last bill became law, stories began to surface of an extreme, disproportionate death rate among African Americans in several cities. 70% death rate, while African Americans are only 20 to 30% of the population. Some cite underlying health conditions as the reason for the extreme, disproportionate death rate, as though this is a reason that nothing can be done, as though we have to just accept this for now. This bill begins the process of addressing the disproportionate death rate, but oversight and advocacy from Congress and the public will still be needed. The bill calls for a report to be issued in 21 days where we should have a better picture of what is happening and hopefully provide a roadmap. The bill calls for reporting data on demographics, including race, on the number and rates of cases, hospitalization, and deaths from COVID. When the report is made public, it will be clear that communities with large African American populations will require focused and concentrated testing with rapid results, that contact tracing and early and aggressive treatment will be required, and that hospitals should reevaluate how they make decisions regarding who has access to ventilators, using formulas that decide based on who they believe has a better chance of survival will undoubtedly hurt African Americans and contribute to the disproportionate death rate.
The entertainment industry is a major source of jobs and economic impact in our communities. People who work in the entertainment industry often have mixed income. That is, they receive income as W-2 employees on some gigs. They work as independent contractors receiving 1099s on other jobs. They say the pandemic unemployment assistance program has overlooked them. Is this being addressed, Congresswoman Bass?
Yes, it absolutely is being addressed. I mean, if you think of my city, Los Angeles, I mean, the entertainment industry is the center of our economy here, so it is being addressed.
The Congressional Black Caucus planning to take concrete measures to confront racial injustice by introducing new legislation directly addressing police brutality and criminal justice reform. Joining us now, Democratic Congresswoman Karen Bass of California, the woman in charge, the chair of both the Congressional Black Caucus and the Judiciary Subcommittee on Crime. I'm so glad you're here this morning. You are leading, shaping this bill. What is, specifically, what are you proposing about police accountability?
Well, police accountability is the #1 issue because right now, the way the laws are, both federally as well as statewide, you can't sue a police officer, it's difficult to fire a police officer, and it's certainly difficult to prosecute a police officer. The world is witnessing the birth of a new movement in our country.
Democratic lawmakers rolled out a package of police reforms, which Karen Bass, chairwoman of the Congressional Black Caucus, calls historic.
That not only holds police accountable and increases transparency, but assists police departments to change the culture.
The bills address a wide range of issues, from police oversight to training to limiting lethal force and outright banning police chokeholds.
With us is the Honorable Karen Bass of the 37th District of California, including Culver City, parts of West LA, South Los Angeles, and Exposition Park. She's also chair of the Congressional Black Caucus and the point person on a list of police reforms introduced this week in the House of Representatives. Congresswoman, thanks for joining us. Let's talk about some of what is in this bill: banning chokeholds, a national database to track police misconduct, all of which appears to have some bipartisan support. But it would also make it easier for victims of police abuse to recover damages and make it easier for charges to be brought against officers regarding abuse. That may be more problematic. Is this an all-or-nothing endeavor, or are you open to compromise?
Well, you know, I mean, to have a big piece of legislation done, we always know that at the end of the day, there are going to be some compromises. But I do think that there are some key features of this bill that are super important if we're really going to make a qualitative change.
Congresswoman Karen Bass is the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. She's helping lead the fight to pass police reform in the House. Today, she laid out just what is at stake as Congress considers this bill.
If this had been a law last year, George Floyd would be alive because chokeholds would be banned. Breonna Taylor would be alive because no-knock warrants for drugs would be banned. Tamir Rice would have graduated high school this May because the officer that killed him, had been fired from a nearby department, and he lied on his application.
I'd like to ask you about an issue that's really affecting folks, the post office, and the Postmaster General has halted these plans to slow things down at the Postal Service. Can you tell us confidently that folks will be able to cast their ballots by mail and know that their votes are going to be counted? And also just the everyday things. So many folks rely on the mail for their prescriptions, for their benefits, all sorts of things. What is the state of the post office?
Well, the state of the post office is under assault by the Trump administration. I will tell you that he has been an enemy of the post office from day one. He has attacked the post office pretty regularly. But right now, of course, the concern is the election that's in less than 80 days away. I do have confidence in especially LA and in our state, but I do not have confidence around the country, because I do think in certain states, they are not concerned about making sure that everybody has a safe and a fair way to vote. Now consider James Holmes, who murdered 12 people and injured 70 others in a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado, the same town as Elijah McClain, where he was arrested. James wore body armor, had a knife, semi-automatic weapons, and an AR-15. Yet he was calmly arrested by the same police department as Elijah McClain without a chokehold or an injection of ketamine. The first job of the commander-in-chief is to protect his people. This commander-in-chief really doesn't care about us. Otherwise, we wouldn't have 160,000 dead Americans.
If it is true that what happened to Breonna Taylor does not warrant homicide charges under current law, what does it say about how the law is written to you?
And that's exactly the point, and that's exactly why we need to change the laws. At other institutions, we have heard stories of prisoners alleging that individuals were being grouped together to develop herd immunity. Another was concerned that he was being bunked with someone who had clear symptoms of COVID-19, and yet another was concerned he was not receiving adequate medical care. BOP officers themselves did not have access to adequate on-site testing, and the incarcerated men from this particular institute did not have the right PPE and other needed resources.
You chaired a hearing yesterday on COVID in prison. Is the Bureau of Prisons doing enough at this point to protect those who are incarcerated from COVID?
No, they're not doing enough. Now, one of the things that we were asking them is, what do you need? How can we be helpful? I don't always like just bringing people before a hearing and criticizing them. I want to help them.
The president-elect told CNN he's concerned about the precedent it would set if President Trump does pardon, let's say, his children, his lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, or even himself, double down on his commitments that his Department of Justice will be independent. I assume you see that as potentially a welcome shift.
Well, absolutely. Anything that will get us back to normalcy is absolutely welcome. But, I think when the study is done on this administration, it's going to give us at least 100 things that should never happen again. And I'm sure there's going to be some legislation that tightens up the checks and balances that clearly didn't work with this administration.
A Pew Research poll released this week found that only 42% of Black Americans said that they would definitely or probably get the coronavirus vaccine. I want to ask you, because not only are you an American leader, but you're a former physician's assistant.
Right.
What is your message to skeptics, and what needs to be done specifically to ensure that minority communities that have been hit harder than white communities by this pandemic What needs to be done to make sure they do get vaccinated?
Well, first of all, it's critical that African Americans and other communities of color participate in the clinical trials. The other things, and I think that this applies to the country as a whole because of the lack of leadership we have had from day one on the virus, there needs to be a serious public education campaign because the messages from the White House up until this day is diminishing the significance of the virus. And so I think massive public education is needed, but it's also important that trusted messengers speak. And so one of the things that the Congressional Black Caucus worked on with our other caucuses, the Latino, the Asian, and the Native American caucuses, we want to have concentrated, focused intervention in our communities because of the disproportionate impact, and that involves testing, tracing, treatment, and vaccine preparation. And so we need to do everything we can to make sure we have state and local funding, but to make sure that we have all of the money that is needed for vaccine distribution, and we need to think of our frontline workers as being first and foremost in that line. H.R. 8161 would provide much-needed resources to communities with especially communities with a disproportionate number of returning citizens. The idea of the bill is to provide grants to establish a centralized process to assist individuals returning to their communities after incarceration.
Let me get your reaction to talk of martial law, seizing voting machines in this country, and creating a special counsel on voter fraud. What do you make about what we are hearing coming out of the White House?
Well, I think it's absolutely tragic. I am very happy to be able to have this shot. And I just want everyone to know that this nurse is great because I barely felt it. And the idea that it's going to keep me safe, this is something that everyone needs to do as soon as it is available in your community. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I'm Congresswoman Karen Bass, and I want to welcome you to this virtual legislative year in review. I'm so sorry we can't do it the way we have every year, in person, but I look forward to 2021 when we'll be able to do that. In this unprecedented year, I hope you have had a safe holiday season and that you and your family remain safe and healthy into the new year. Let's begin this event like we do every year with a blessing. I'd like to introduce 3 faith leaders from congregations in our district to offer a multi-faith blessing for this event. We will hear first from Dr. Namazaka, the founder of the Imam Center in Palms, then from Reverend Dr. Winford Bell, senior pastor of Mount Olive Second Missionary Baptist Church and the founder of Silver Linings of Hope Coalition, and finally from Rabbi Sharon Brous, co-founder and senior rabbi of ICAR.
In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. Praise be to the Lord of the universe, who has created us and made us into tribes and nations, that we may know each other, not that we may despise each other. O Allah, unite our hearts and set aright our mutual affairs. Guide us in the path of peace. Liberate us from darkness by your light. Save us from enormities, whether open or hidden. Bless us in our ears, eyes, hearts, spouse, and children. Turn to us. Truly you are after returning, most merciful. Make us grateful for your bounty and full of praise for it, so that we may continue to receive it and complete your blessing upon us. O God, bless our Honorable Congresswoman Karen Bass and strengthen her with exceptional wisdom and courage she has in her effort of serving her community and our nation. Amen.
Oh, Heavenly and gracious Father, as we continue in this prayer, I thank you for the privilege of prayer, dear God. And I ask right now that you do that which you do best, save, deliver, and to keep us. I pray now for our beloved sister who gives excellent leadership in the personality of Ms. Karen Bass of the 37th Congressional District. I pray for all of our mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters who have suffered from the COVID-19. And I'm even praying for those families whose loved ones have been taken. Over 300,000 plus souls have been taken. And God, we pray now for all of these devastated families. But yes, God, we also pray for the many men and women, brothers and sisters who are pouring out their soul and making lines available for food. For men and women who have lost their job and lost their income. I pray now, God, for all of our brothers and sisters who are desperately challenged with this COVID-19. Keep us all, as only a God knows how. In the mighty and matchless name of Jesus, I pray. And God's people said, amen.
We call out today to the Holy One, known to us by so many different names. Today, Eloheinu v'Eloi Avotenu, God and God of our ancestors, creator of all flesh, healer of broken hearts. We thank you for being with us in this time of pain and promise. These past many months, we have faced death and illness, isolation, and fear. We know these are challenging days, and we're more aware than ever of our vulnerability. And we also know that this is a time of moral awakening, a time of transition, of new opportunity, of new possibility. We know that if we hold this time responsibly, if we're willing to engage in a real reckoning in this time, if we're willing to care for one another, if we're willing to open our hearts and minds, that this can and must be a time of healing. So we ask your blessings today for our dear representative, Karen Bass, she who has walked through the darkest and most challenging times with integrity, with moral clarity, and always with love. Please keep her heart open as she walks through this chapter, as she continues to lead us toward healing, holding before her always the centrality of human dignity. Strengthen her resolve against the toxic ideologies in our country that commodify human life and that lead us to care more about protecting profit than people, that turn us against each other in crisis and make us enemies. Strengthen her leadership so that she can remind all of us what America could be, a nation that lifts up the innate dignity of every single person as an image of the Holy One. Please, God, keep Congresswoman Bass healthy and safe. Keep her hopeful, keep her flexible and adaptable, pliant like the reed and not hard like the cedar. And give her moments of levity and relief, joy and laughter. Help her see beauty around her always. With the strength of our faith and solidarity, let us say amen.
Hi, Darren Harris here. And I just want to start by wishing each and every single one of you a Happy New Year. Usually during this time of year, we're all together, fellowshipping, taking selfies, and catching up on different activities that happen throughout the year. And so I don't have to remind you that this year is unlike any other. But like most events, we're going virtual. But I'm so hopeful that with a new vaccine and with a new administration, we'll be back together soon. Now, in spite of all the closures, this congressional office never closed. In fact, at the onset, this office was responsible for ensuring that dozens of constituents who were stranded abroad returned home safely. This office was also responsible for connecting small businesses, faith-based organizations, nonprofit organizations with federal resources, connecting those who are out of work with their state office as related to unemployment, and most of all, ensuring that you all receive your direct payments through the CARES Act. Now, usually when I greet you all during this time of year, it's full of themes of faith, peace, and love, but this year, I also feel a profound sense of gratitude. I'm grateful for family, I'm grateful for friends and health, and for folks just like you. And so that's why it's extremely important, more now than ever, that you stay connected to us. Please email us, call us, fill out website entries, go on our socials. We know that the best policy comes from folks who are affected by that policy, and we convey all of those opinions and concerns directly to the Congresswoman. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce you to the team that is responsible for doing it all, your local district office. Thank you, and Happy New Year.
I'm Jacqueline Hamilton, Senior Counsel with Congresswoman Karen Bass. I've been with her for 7 years this month, and I handle issues like education, environment, healthcare, and foreign affairs in the district office. I also oversee our Letters and Certificates program, the Congressional Art Competition, and nominations to the nation's elite service academies like West Point and Annapolis. I look forward to serving you.
I'm Claudia Aragon, Casework Supervisor and Operations Manager in my 6th year with Team Bass. I make sure that office operations run smoothly, and I oversee contacts when you have problems with federal agencies such as the IRS, Social Security, the VA, and the Postal Service.
Hi, my name is Kenneth On. I'm the senior caseworker in our office. I've been here for about 5 years now. And in addition to handling cases as Claudia described, I also help to manage the data, meaning I figure out how best to reach our constituents and stay in touch with you. And I look forward to serving you in 2021. Thank you.
Hello. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Stan Henderson. I'm a congressional liaison. This is my 19th year as a congressional staffer, as I previously served with Congresswoman Diane Watson. I have been with Congresswoman Bass since 2009. My areas of responsibility are security, transportation, and logistics, and other duties as assigned for the Los Angeles District Office. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Dylan Ewell. I serve as Senior Field Representative here in the office of Congresswoman Karen Bass. I've had the distinct honor of working on issues such as Africa, criminal justice, transportation, South Los Angeles, housing, jobs, and the economy, and amongst other things, working with the People's Advisory Council. After nearly half a decade, I just want to say that my time here with the office has been nothing short of amazing. Just engaging with constituents by taking calls, recording your comments, meeting with you in person and at events has made my experience exceptional. I'm officially transitioning, but I do want you to know that the office is here and willing to serve you, the constituents of the 37th Congressional District. Thank you all so much.
Every year, I look forward to the Congressional Art Competition, an opportunity for high school artists to submit their work for recognition and for me to have the opportunity to meet young people and their families from the district while we celebrate their talents. The winning artwork is hung in the U.S. Capitol for a year, and the winner receives a pair of airline tickets and an invitation to attend the opening art reception in Washington, D.C. Hundreds of thousands of people view this artwork each year, including my colleagues and I, as we travel back and forth from our offices to the House floor in the Capitol. I'm sorry that unfortunately this year we didn't have the opportunity for our winner to come to the Capitol, but I'm going to make sure that in 2021 we have an opportunity for our winner to be able to visit Washington, D.C. So 7 years ago, when Jacqueline Hamilton joined my staff, we had a very small program. But anybody that knows Jacqueline knows that she can take something small and turn it into something grand. And together with her husband, who is an artist, David Valentine, they turned the art competition into a chance to change young lives. Lisa Vasquez agreed to co-chair the art competition committee, and then other art educators and working artists joined as judges and volunteers, and we now offer recognition to over 100 talented students each year, coming from dozens of art teachers at 12 to 15 different high schools. I'm really sad to say, though, that David Valentine passed away suddenly in June. We decided to recognize his contributions by naming the first place prize in his honor. I'm so deeply grateful for his enormous contributions to art education and to the Congressional Art Competition in my district, and also the way he impacted the lives of so many people using art as a vehicle to communicate and build community. And now, without the pandemic, our district would have had a professional art show in May with all of the entrants. This year, we had to move the contest online, and you can view the virtual gallery on my website at the link below, where you can also view the names of the winners. And with that, I'd like to introduce the first recipient of the David Valentine Congressional Art Competition Prize, Isaiah Levels of South Los Angeles, who attends Culver City High.
My name is Isaiah Levels, and I'm proud to be the winner of the 37th District 2020 Arts Competition. My involvement into this program was pretty progressive and challenging. My piece that I chose, first of all, it's called The American Dream. So it's basically your choice to do what you want to do. The elements I chose were a little toy car or vehicle, a wood piece or broken board, and the background behind it is a map. It's a creative map from my vision, only because I'm interested in maps, like cartography. Honestly, this competition was harder than I expected, especially with the times going on nowadays. So, yeah, it was an honor, and I just wanted to thank you, for inviting me and letting me participate in your competition.
When a constituent runs into problems with a federal agency like the IRS, Social Security, Immigration, or the Veterans Administration, or the Post Office, they can turn to my office for help. Vietnam veteran Renee Talbot contacted our office this year about an unusual case of bravery that has gone unrecognized until now. Then Sergeant Talbot served honorably for 4 years in the U.S. Air Force, including 2 tours of duty in Vietnam. In 2018, Mr. Talbot requested his service records from the National Archive and discovered in an evaluation form from 1968 that his superior officer had recommended him for a Bronze Star Medal. No further action was taken at the time, and he was not informed. Mr. Talbot deserves to have his actions acknowledged. This year, I made an entry into the Congressional Record, the official proceedings from the Congress, of the call to attention to the strength and courage he displayed during his active duty service, shown in this excerpt from his evaluation about an incident in 1968. His self-control under fire showed his good discipline and outstanding ability to react under adverse conditions. For his action in this incident, our Airman Talbot was recommended for the Bronze Star. Well, I had the pleasure of speaking to Mr. Talbot recently after he was presented with the Congressional Record. I want to thank Mr. Talbot for your service, and if you have any problems, any of the constituents have problems with the VA, please contact me. It is an honor to serve veterans as they have served our country. Now let's take a look back at our legislative accomplishments and what has happened in Washington, D.C. in 2020. What a year this has been for all of us, not just in the 37th District, not just in the United States, but actually in the entire world. Well, everyone, I always enjoy this part of our annual legislative review, but what a year 2020 was. You know, we actually were only in session for 2.5 months before the pandemic hit. And then we really didn't know what to do. I mean, you remember back to March, we all were told to shelter in place. And I think most people thought, okay, we'll be home for a little while and then life will get back to normal. Well, it never did in the Capitol and to this day, and it probably won't for a good part of next year. So that meant that our work, in a way, had to continue, but we had to learn new ways of doing our work. But basically, the context for this year was set in November 2018, when Democrats took control of the House. And you know, at the beginning of this year, we had 232 Democrats, 197 Republicans. And so the House had changed over in 2019. Just when we got our sea legs, then the pandemic hit. But in the Senate, you know, of course, the Senate was in the hands of Mitch McConnell, who enjoyed the idea that he was called the Grim Reaper, because you know that to this day, over 200 bills sit on his desk, 200 bills that were voted out of the House with bipartisan support. Now we have another 200 bills that are sitting over there that were just voted along party lines. But the point is, Mitch McConnell really didn't pay attention to doing much this year except for confirming judges. So 2020 was an interesting year trying to figure out how to respond to something that none of us had ever experienced before. But let me just tell you a little bit. One of the first things we had to do when it was very clear that this pandemic was going to be devastating to us economically is we had to pass legislation that provided support to the country and to the people who were suffering. And so when it comes to the 37th district, I did want you to know that millions and millions of dollars came into our district. We had over 340,000 district residents that received support from the federal government. We personally helped over 1,800, especially with the post office. And I'm sure you guys remember in Culver City at one of our public housing developments, they decided arbitrarily just to stop delivering mail and told people they had to drive to the post office to pick up their mail. Now, they were told to drive to the post office and pick up their mail at the same time when we were told to stay at home and shelter in place. So how did that make sense? So we definitely had to do what we needed to do to make sure that those residents were able to have their mail delivered. We had over 137th district residents that were stranded around the world, because you remember when the pandemic hit and countries around the world were scrambling trying to figure out what to do. Well, we had over 137 district residents that wanted to come back home, wanted to figure out how to get home. And so Claudia and Ken and Dylan and Darren worked very hard to make sure that our people were able to come back home. And in this time, we did over 35 virtual town halls because we wanted to constantly keep people informed as to what we needed to do. And so legislatively, we passed the CARES Act. And you know, the CARES Act was where the first aid came to our community. And just a couple of examples, $4 billion were available for state and local government. And then there was the Paycheck Protection Program that was used to support small businesses. And so a lot of support that has gone into delivering for the people of the country has been held up. I mean, we passed another bill 6 months ago, and the Republicans, again, would not bring it up for a vote in the Senate. You know, there's several residents that ask questions. Tesega from Culver City wants to know why the stimulus check is so small. It'll only last a family of 4 for 1 month. So if the Republicans want to give $2,000, why is there pushback? Is there a hidden agenda that she's not understanding? Yeah. The hidden agenda is the Republicans have no problem giving away the store to people who are extremely rich, but for whatever reason feel if they give ordinary people, working families, a check, that then they're not going to want to go back to work. I think that is so offensive. So out of the House, we passed the $2,000 stimulus check that the president wanted. Remember, he was going to veto the bill unless we raised the amount. Now, you know, we had proposed way more than $600 6 months ago, and that's the bill that they wouldn't take up. So we voted on what the president wanted, and let's see what happens in the Senate. By the time you're watching this recording, I am very hopeful that the Senate did what they should do and that they passed, one, the stimulus bill, but also the additional bill that raises the amount that people get to $2,000. So I'm hoping that people will be getting their checks in the next few days, actually, the next 2 weeks at the most. And basically, if you qualified for a check before, you will get another check, and there's nothing that you need to do. Amy from South Robertson wants to know what's going to happen with our unemployment. Well, that was extended. So unemployment will be extended for a few more months. Now, when we passed the bill this week, we were really just concerned about getting us to the inauguration so that our 4-year nightmare will be over. We will have a decent administration who I know will actually care and really want to support the American people. And so this is just a down payment. Shay with Craft Wheelchair Repair in Mid-Wilshire is asking about small business grants and how to apply for them. Well, you can always call our office, 323-965-1422, and we can give you the information you need. But if you were a small business that received the loan before, you can go back to that financial institution and hopefully receive another loan. And by the way, you know those loans are supposed to be forgivable. So the point of the loan was to allow you to maintain your workforce. Now, if you're the only employee, well, you are still eligible. If you are a nonprofit, you are eligible. If you are a faith community institution, you are eligible. So if you don't lay off your staff, then that loan will turn into a grant. And again, if you have any problems with it at all, please call my office. So I did want to talk about other legislative accomplishments that we did this year. And again, you have to look at this year in context. Because of the pandemic, we haven't been in Washington very much. As a matter of fact, we were really only functioning the first 2.5 months of the year. And then after that, we have been trying to figure out how to function remotely, periodically coming back to DC, but the whole year has been very confusing. Now, in spite of that, I did this year introduce 21 pieces of legislation that cover several different areas, and I'll explain to you a couple of those. 6 of the bills that I introduced passed the House and are languishing in the Senate, needless to say. And of course, most notable was the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And that was the first transformative police reform bill that was passed out of the House of Representatives, as far as anybody knows, I think the first ever. And as part of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, we banned chokeholds, which is how George Floyd died. We banned no-knock warrants, which is how Breonna Taylor died. We called for a national registry of bad cops, which is how 12-year-old Tamir Rice was killed by a police officer who had been fired from another police department for instability. And what we learned in this process is a lot of times when officers get into trouble and they have, either violence, abuse, racial profiling, they just go to another department. And so part of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act was to stop that so that wouldn't happen. Now, we'll be back at it first thing next year. So I believe with President Biden, Vice President Harris, we'll be able to get police reform legislation done. We'll also pass legislation, something that is very near and dear to my heart that I feel very passionate about, is criminal justice reform, period. And one of the things that we have done in California very admirably is we've reduced our prison population, but I worry about what happens to the men and women and children when they get released. So I passed legislation out of the House that will be taken up again in January, and also it will be taken up in the Senate, to call for a program that would be run by people who were formerly incarcerated to help new folks who were released essentially reintegrate and readjust to life on the outside. And so it's a one-stop shop for a reentry program. Now, we're fortunate in our district. We have a program that is run by the county. It was actually started by County Supervisor Mark Ridley Thomas. This is a program that would function more on a grassroots level. So one of the things that I think about criminal justice reform, and I'm so glad that finally there is a national movement around it, but usually when people talk about criminal justice reform, they're really only talking about men. They're not talking about women, and they're not talking about children. And so I had developed a piece of legislation that focuses on women who are pregnant and in custody. And this is bipartisan legislation that passed out of the House, and I look forward to introducing it in the new Congress with my Senate partner, Amy Klobuchar, and I'm sure that we'll be able to get this bill on President Biden's desk because it is a very bipartisan piece of legislation. A lot of my colleagues didn't realize that pregnant women were incarcerated, and some of the treatment and some of the stories are just absolutely heartbreaking. So what this bill does is, this bill says we have to pay attention to the health and well-being of the mother and the baby. So for example, you know, of course, that a pregnant woman has additional nutritional needs. Some prisons adjust for those additional needs by giving a woman an extra peanut butter sandwich at the end of the day. Well, that's just completely inappropriate. And so looking at the health and well-being of pregnant inmates is the basis of this bill. And I have another bill that I'm going to introduce in the next Congress that takes a comprehensive look at women who are involved in the justice system, why they get arrested, what happens when they're incarcerated, and then also what happens after they get out. On an entirely different subject, you know, when I look at this slide, it definitely brings back a lot of emotion because this gentleman, a Korean gentleman, is in his 90s. And he came and he talked to me about his situation. In the United States, we don't allow people to go to North Korea. But there are a lot of Korean families here who have relatives in the North, some of whom haven't seen their relatives since the country was divided in the 1950s. And this gentleman is an example of that. He hasn't seen his siblings, and he's very concerned that he might not live long enough to see them. And so when I heard about this issue in Los Angeles, as a matter of fact, our Kenneth On brought it to our attention as a young leader in Koreatown. He organized a meeting and I met with Korean residents in Los Angeles. They brought this issue to my attention, and then I met this gentleman in my office in DC, and we passed this bill out of the House. This is another bill that will be reintroduced, and I'm sure will make it to President Biden's desk in the next Congress. Another bill that is so important that I'm also doing with another Senate partner, Senator Gillibrand, is called Build Local, Hire Local, because all of us complain about the need for jobs in our district. And you can see these major projects being undertaken, but you look at the people working in the projects, and not many of them are from especially the South LA part of the 37th District. And so this is a pretty comprehensive bill that really focuses on people, on hiring people that live in the area where these big public sector projects are being built. And there's also a training and a recruitment component to this legislation. So I will look forward to reintroducing that legislation with Senator Gillibrand. And the other work involving committees and caucuses, I had a lot of responsibility this year. I chaired the Congressional Black Caucus. I continue to chair the Congressional Caucus on Foster Youth, which is a caucus that I started, a bipartisan caucus that I started when I arrived in Congress 10 years ago. I also chair the subcommittee in the House Foreign Affairs Committee. The subcommittee covers Africa, global health, global human rights, and international organizations like the UN or the World Health Organization. I was asked to chair the committee, a subcommittee in judiciary that covers crime, terrorism, and homeland security. And it's from this committee that I have been able to do the criminal justice reform legislation. And so the Congressional Black Caucus, ironically, at the beginning of the year, we said that 2020 was going to be a critical year for two reasons. One, the census, most important. We knew the Trump administration was devising plans to make sure that certain communities were not counted. You remember that one of the first things he wanted to do was to put a question on the census about your citizenship. Well, our Constitution calls for counting all people, period. There's nothing in our Constitution that says the only people that exist are people who are U.S. citizens. And so putting the census online also was going to further disenfranchise folks, because we know a lot of people either don't have access to broadband, they might not be able to afford it, or they might not know how to get online. And so we felt that the census was going to be absolutely critical. And then, of course, we knew this election was going to define our country for the next 2 generations. It's very clear that the only things my Republican colleagues were interested in was to confirm judges. Now, why do they focus on that? Well, there's 3 branches of government. There's the executive, which is the White House, the presidency. There's the legislative, which is the 2 houses of Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives. And then there's the judiciary. Well, out of these 3 branches of government, only the judiciary has lifetime appointments. And so if they can populate the judiciary with extremely conservative young judges, they can essentially assure the reshaping of our country. And so with those 2 things in mind, we thought 2020 was going to be a critical year. So we called for an emergency summit. We had over 1,000 African American leaders who attended the conference that lasted over a 2-day period. And on the second day of the conference happened to be when Speaker Pelosi allowed President Trump to do his State of the Union. If you remember, there was a lot of back and forth over the beginning of the year. President Trump didn't realize that he couldn't just walk into the House of Representatives, but that he had to be invited by Speaker Pelosi, and she was going to be the one to decide when and where he was going to give his State of the Union. You might have remembered that she actually had offered or suggested that he just give it in the Oval Office. I will tell you, when I watched the State of the Union, I was absolutely shocked when he finished speaking and she stood up and tore up his speech, because it was just filled with lie after lie after lie. But anyway, the Congressional Black Caucus held this emergency summit. It was really exciting and inspiring, and we had planned to take the summit on the road. We had planned to go around the country and have regional summits, especially in those areas that President Trump had targeted, that he was going to go into Black communities to try to shave off 5 to 10% of the Black vote. And as soon as we left, within days, our lives dramatically changed because of the pandemic. So, chairing the Congressional Black Caucus, I was also asked by Speaker Pelosi to do the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, because the bill had several component parts, and the majority of the bill had been written by members of the Congressional Black Caucus who had tried to pass legislation over the years and were never able to get it done. And so at her desire for the Black Caucus to take the lead, and since I was chairing the caucus and chairing the subcommittee where the bill was heard, I was given that leadership responsibility. But at the same time, we also work lockstep with the Hispanic Caucus, the Asian Pacific Islander Caucus, and we called ourselves the Tri-Caucus +2, because for the first time in U.S. history, we had Native American women who were members of Congress. So the Tri-Caucus +2 worked on a variety of issues together. Most notably, we have focused on COVID, because COVID has disproportionately impacted each of our communities. And we have been advocating for, and we've been winning bits and pieces, but it's going to take a new president, frankly, to actually do the right thing. We feel there needs to be a targeted, concentrated intervention in communities where there's a disproportionate death rate. And what does that mean? Well, if you have a specific community where it's very disproportionate, you need to go in massive numbers with concentrated testing, with contact tracing, with aggressive treatment, and now, thank goodness, with a vaccine. And you know we're going to have to do very specific education with each of our populations so that they won't be fearful of the vaccine. In the Congressional Caucus on Foster Youth, once again, we had to focus on COVID. Now, you know, over the years, we recruit young people to come to the Capitol. We have over 100 of them that come to the Capitol every year for what we call our annual Shadow Day. And very sad, of course, we recruited all 100 young people, but they couldn't come to the Capitol this year. Well, one of our young leaders who's worked with us for several years, unfortunately, was one of the first victims to COVID. Young man, he was in his early 20s and he passed away. And so the young folks got together and they developed a piece of legislation that they named in his honor. And essentially what the legislation is calling for is, don't forget the foster youth. The foster youth have fallen through the cracks because of COVID. And many of them have been left to fend for themselves because social workers haven't been able to go out and work as they normally do. And so the Congressional Caucus on Foster Youth this time, and we have over 100 members, it's a bipartisan caucus, has really focused on COVID because COVID has taken over our lives. And the House Foreign Affairs Committee on Africa, we held numerous hearings. One of our first hearings was about COVID, but it was also about Democratic backsliding, because what we have seen in our country, especially during the election, leading up to the election and after the election, we have a president who is literally trying to overturn the election. Well, in the African countries, we saw an increase in that as well. We saw presidents and prime ministers decide to postpone their election, to crack down on dissent and protests, and essentially to use COVID as an excuse to close and shrink democratic space. And then, of course, we have the crisis that's happening in Cameroon and in Ethiopia. And those are examples of issues that we addressed in the Committee on Africa. And as I mentioned previously, the Subcommittee on Crime, not only did we deal with George Floyd, but we also dealt with the reentry issues. We focused on the opioid epidemic, and we also focused on women. And as a matter of fact, the woman that wrote Orange is the New Black, who actually had been incarcerated herself, she was one of the witnesses that gave testimony and also gave validity to what we were trying to do. There was an episode of the Orange of the New Black that we actually showed that was about a woman who was pregnant and what happened to her after she delivered her baby. So because of the pandemic, I've not had any town halls this year. And so I have definitely missed our in-person interaction and can't wait until we can get back to doing that. But one thing is that, you know, there's always a good side to it. And so all of us have gotten adjusted to Zooming and doing things virtually. And I have to say that when the pandemic subsides and we have people being vaccinated and it's safe again, I think we're still going to maintain some of what we became adjusted to with COVID. And so we held virtual town halls talking about everything under the sun, especially after the first stimulus bills were passed. We wanted to make sure that people understood how to access them when COVID testing became available. So we did many town halls to reach out to people in the district, but also around the country. And so I just want you to know, my office will always help you with casework. And if you have issues, the IRS, Small Business Administration, the post office, please feel free to call our office, 323-965-1422. So looking ahead to the upcoming Congress, what do we have? We have President Biden and Vice President Harris, and all of us are counting the days. I have to tell you, Speaker Pelosi, she counts the hours. Every time we have a conference call with our Democratic caucus, she holds up a sheet and tells us how many hours we have until the inauguration. All of us I know are actually a little frightened right now because this guy has decompensated so badly, we really don't know what he's going to do over the next 20 days. And I will tell you that Janice from Baldwin Hills, she's concerned about the legislative process on January 6th, which is just in a couple of days, regarding validation of the Electoral College. And so she asked, is there a possibility that the election results can be overturned? Jerry from Palms is also asking, What, if anything, are Democrats planning to do to ensure Biden-Harris get the 270 electoral votes? So I will tell you that all of us are going to watch some shenanigans in a few days, but understand they will just be shenanigans. President Biden, Vice President Harris will get their 270 electoral votes. We are not doing anything special. The question that Jerry is asking is, what are Democrats doing? We're just going to follow the Constitution. That's all. We'll be okay, but there will be drama. There will be shenanigans. And frankly, I'm worried that there's going to be violence because the president is calling all of his white supremacist supporters, and not all of them are white supremacists, but he is calling them the Proud Boys and the other folks. He's telling people to come to D.C. and demonstrate. The last time they came to D.C., which was just a couple of weeks ago, 4 people were stabbed at the rally. So I am definitely worried on January 6th, and you can be sure I'm not going to be walking down the streets in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. I'll be here in the Capitol, but I'll be sure not to go outside. But it will be okay. Philip in Venice asks, how can we make combating climate change a priority in Washington? I have no doubt that one of the first things that President Biden is going to do is to reverse a number of the executive orders that Trump put in that hurts every aspect of our environment, from water to air to drilling. I mean, every aspect. And so I know that that will be a very important part of his administration. Remember, he brought on John Kerry just to focus on the climate and also put him on the cabinet. So I think that's a very significant demonstration of the administration's commitment around climate change. So Dorothy from Palms asked, under the new administration, what safety measures are being taken to ensure Trump and his followers won't continue to harm the American people? Well, I'm going to tell you, none of us really know what this guy's going to do. I mean, all of us, I know, are hoping that he goes to Mar-a-Lago. Well, actually, they don't want him to go there. They're trying to organize so that he can't move there because his property, Mar-a-Lago, was zoned to be a resort, not a residence. And so they don't want him there. I don't know where he's going to go, but all of us would really like for him to be off the stage. I do fear a little bit that he's going to travel around the country having rallies. 7 million people voted for him. So there is the potential that he will continue to do harm to the American people. But as long as he stays within the law, he will be okay. But if he violates the law, he's a former president. And so he might have thought he had blanket immunity before, but on January 20th at about 3 o'clock, all that goes away. Clyde from South LA says, what are the plans for student loan debts? I know that the incoming administration plans to have a student loan forgiveness program, so we'll have to wait and see. Student loan forgiveness is something I've worked on for a number of years, and I will continue to work on that issue. So I want everybody to know that the vaccine, when you have an opportunity to get the vaccine, please get it. Now, I will tell you, I was honestly very leery of the vaccine because I associated it with this administration, and I know that vaccine development takes a long time. Well, you remember before the election, he kept talking about the vaccine was going to be ready by Election Day. So things like that really worried me because I felt that it was being rushed. But then when I did a little research, I found out the development of this vaccine actually started 17 years ago. So this is called COVID-19 because it was discovered in 2019. But coronaviruses have been around for 17 years. This is the third coronavirus, so we could say it's a cousin of the last two. The first one that showed up in 2003, and they started to develop a vaccine, and then it kind of went away, and so that stopped. And then in 2012, another cousin of coronavirus was found, and so they started to continue the vaccine development, and then that went away. So they had the foundation already developed when COVID-19 hit. And what the scientists did is that they just kept their head down and they just did their work. They didn't pay any attention to Trump. And so when I realized that this vaccine really wasn't rushed, is safe, then the first opportunity I had to take it, I got it. And I want you to know that I had absolutely no side effects. My arm was a little sore the next day, but every time you get a flu shot, your arm's sore. Every time you get any kind of shot, your arm is sore. That is it. No headaches, no nothing. And so I would just strongly encourage you, because the only way we're going to get our lives back to normal is if we are vaccinated, and we're going to need up to 90% of the US population to be vaccinated before it becomes like measles, where you don't hear about people getting measles anymore. So Lori from South Robertson asked, when and how will COVID-19 vaccine be rolled out in Los Angeles? And I will tell you that it's actually already being rolled out now. So first responders, residents in nursing homes are able to get it. So just pay attention to the local news, and they will let you know when it becomes available to the general public. The thought is it'll become available to the general public probably at the end of spring going into summer. Now, one thing that I feel very excited and confident about, I know one of the first things that President Biden is going to do is he's going to call for the military, he's going to call for massive involvement to make sure that we can mass produce and mass distribute the vaccine. There will be national leadership. One of the reasons why so many Americans have died is because we have not had the leadership in our country that treated this as though it was an invasion of a foreign army and brought together all of the resources of the richest country in the history of the world to deal with this pandemic. That did not happen under President Trump. I am confident it will happen under President Biden. And I'm also very confident that by the time we are in December 2021, and really even the fall of 2021, that our lives will be back to normal. And I look forward to seeing all of you in a town hall, and I look forward to next year's annual legislative review being in person. Thank you so much. You should know that you can always contact my office. I am extremely fortunate to have the district staff that work every day. And I want you to know, they've been in the office every day. A lot of offices and businesses have been closed down, but they have been at work every day. And I just want to take the opportunity to thank them, to thank all of the constituents in the 37th district, and to tell you, I know 2021 is going to be a much better year. Thank you and Happy New Year.